In your younger years, people may have called you mom, honey, wife, or friend. You were always part of something bigger. A family, a marriage, a home filled with laughter and motion. But one day, the noise begins to fade. The phone rings less often. The chairs at the dinner table stay empty. The house, once bursting with life, now hums with silence. It's not that you feel forgotten, not exactly, but in the quiet moments when you're washing dishes or folding laundry or sitting with a cup of tea, you might find yourself wondering, is this how the rest of life is supposed to feel? You are not alone in asking that question. Today, on Wise Elders Insight, we share the story of Helen Summers. She is 68 years old, a retired librarian, a widow, and a mother of 2 adult sons who live far away. She is a woman who, like many, woke up one day and realized she was growing old. On her own. But this story is not just about grief. It is not just about silence or sadness. This is a story about what comes after. After the heartbreak, after the loneliness, after the stillness. This is a story about finding yourself again, because growing older alone does not mean living without meaning. Let us begin. The quiet after. Helen Summers was 68 years old. She lived alone in a modest blue house on a quiet street in western Pennsylvania. It was the same home where she had raised her 2 sons, Eric and James. Years ago, that house had been full of noise, full of motion, full of love. There were toys under the sofa, backpacks dropped by the door, and jazz records playing too loud on Sunday afternoons. Her husband, Robert, would hum along while reading the paper. The boys would argue over whose turn it was to do the dishes. Life was loud and messy and beautiful. Helen and Robert had been married for 42 years. Their love wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet and reliable. He made the coffee. She folded his sweaters. They held hands during evening walks and always kissed goodbye, even after small arguments. That rhythm of togetherness, that gentle routine, they had built it over a lifetime. Then it ended. Robert passed away 3 years ago, following complications from a surgery. Helen had known his health was declining, but grief doesn't operate on logic. One morning he was there beside her in bed. The next, she was waking up alone. After the funeral, her son stayed for a few days. They helped sort through paperwork, stocked her freezer, made sure the house felt less empty, if only briefly. Then they returned to their lives. Eric had a tech job in Chicago. James was raising 2 children in North Carolina. They checked in from time to time, called when they could, sent holiday photos. But in truth, their lives were moving forward, and Helen's felt suspended in place. She tried to fill the days. Coffee at 7, a short walk at 10, lunch by noon, evening news at 6. The routines gave shape to time, but not to meaning. As the months passed, she began to feel the weight of something deeper than grief. It was loneliness, yes, but more than that, it was a sense of fading. She realized how many days passed without anyone saying her name. No one asked her opinion. No one needed her for anything. She did not feel anger or self-pity. Only absence. One morning, while cleaning out an old drawer, she found a leather-bound journal, a gift from Robert years ago for their 25th anniversary. On the first page, in his familiar handwriting, he had written, "If you ever feel alone, write your way home." So she did. At first, it was grocery lists, then memories, eventually, feelings. The grief came out, unfiltered. The sadness, the fear, the frustration. But surprisingly, so did hope. She hadn't expected that part. Hope was the quiet thread in between the tears, a soft reminder that maybe life wasn't over just because it had changed. It was not a new beginning, not yet, but it was a whisper, a gentle nudge that there might still be more waiting for her. Not in the past, not in what was lost, but in what remained. The spark of connection. The journal helped Helen begin to untangle her feelings, but it could not speak back. What she missed most, she realized, was not just companionship. It was conversation. Real, human exchange. Someone to laugh with. Someone to tell her that her thoughts mattered. That realization came quietly, on a Tuesday morning. She was watering her small backyard garden when she heard a voice call out from the other side of the fence. "Tomatoes looking good this year," the voice said. It was June, her neighbor from 2 doors down. June was around Helen's age, widowed too, and often seen walking her little terrier in the afternoons. The two women had exchanged polite greetings over the years, but never much more. Helen smiled. "They're stubborn this season, like me." June laughed. "That just means they've got character." It was a small moment, but in Helen's quiet life, it felt like someone had opened a window. A breath of fresh air. That same afternoon, June dropped by with a plate of lemon cookies and an invitation. "I'm heading to the community center tomorrow. Just a few of us widows playing cards, talking about nonsense, and occasionally solving the world's problems. Come if you'd like." Helen hesitated. She had never thought of herself as a community center type, but something in June's warm eyes, or maybe in the quiet ache of her own days, made her say, "Sure, why not?" The next day, Helen stepped into a room full of women who looked a little like her, women who had raised children, loved deeply, lost greatly, women who had once been someone's whole world and were now rediscovering what it meant to be their own. They talked about everything, funny things, serious things, forgotten dreams. Helen didn't say much at first, just listened. But she laughed. And laughing felt like a muscle she hadn't used in a long time. Over the weeks, the group became something steady. A place where Helen wasn't invisible. Where her stories, her memories, her opinions were met with nods and knowing smiles. Where she wasn't someone's widow, but simply Helen. It wasn't a miracle or a grand transformation, but it was connection. Honest, ordinary, human connection. And it made her feel like part of the world again, rediscovering joy. Helen had not realized how long she had been living on autopilot, days blending into one another like soft brushstrokes in muted gray. But now, things were changing. Not all at once, not loudly, but gently, in small ways that mattered. She started saying yes more often. Yes to coffee after card games. Yes to afternoon walks with June and the little terrier. Yes to joining a book club at the library where she had once worked. It felt strange at first, stepping back into spaces she had once known so well. But something in her heart stirred each time she showed up. Something that felt a lot like courage. One quiet morning, Helen sat at her kitchen table and realized she wanted to try painting again. She had not touched a brush since college. Life had simply gotten too full, too fast. But now, with the gift of time and no one rushing her, she pulled out a forgotten watercolor set from a closet. The first strokes were hesitant, shaky. But slowly, a small flower came into focus. That flower went on her fridge. It wasn't about talent. It was about joy. Joy in creation. Joy in remembering she was more than her past roles, more than a wife, a mother, a grieving widow. She was still a woman with stories inside her, with interests, with color. Each morning began to feel a little different. The house, though still quiet, didn't feel quite so hollow. It became hers again, not just a museum of memories, but a living, breathing space shaped by who she was becoming now. Sometimes she'd sit in the garden and write in her journal, not out of sadness, but simply to capture the beauty of ordinary moments. The taste of ripe strawberries, the way the breeze felt on her skin, the way June always walked just a bit too fast, but waited without judgment. Helen wasn't looking for big happiness. She was looking for honest peace, and she was beginning to find it, in her own way, at her own pace. There were still hard days, days when the silence returned a little louder than usual, days when she missed Robert so deeply she could barely breathe. But now she had tools, friends, a voice that no longer trembled when she used it. Helen was no longer just surviving. She was quietly, gently, living again. A new chapter begins. One Friday afternoon, Helen was helping clean up after the weekly card game when June turned to her with a spark in her eyes. "You ever been to Vermont in the fall?" she asked, wiping crumbs off the table. Helen paused. "Not since I was a teenager." "Why?" June grinned. "Well, there's a group of us planning a little weekend bus trip. Just some women, some cider, and a whole lot of autumn leaves. You in?" Helen hesitated. Travel had once been second nature. Road trips with Robert, family vacations with the boys. But that was a different lifetime. Now, the idea of packing a bag and stepping onto a bus full of near strangers felt vulnerable. But then she remembered how it had felt the last time she said yes. The joy of painting, the laughter with June, the feeling of coming back to life. So she nodded. "I think I am." The morning of the trip, Helen stood in her doorway with her weekend bag and a scarf tied loosely around her neck. The air smelled like crisp apples and distant bonfires. For a moment, she felt young again, nervous, curious, open. The bus ride was full of chatter and stories, most of them funny, some deeply tender. There were women who had lost more than she had, and women who still carried regrets heavier than grief. But none of them were pretending. That was the gift of growing older together. You stopped performing. You just were. When the bus wound through the golden hills of Vermont, the entire group gasped. Helen found herself tearing up, not from sadness, but from awe. It had been a long time since something so simple made her feel so deeply. They visited a small-town bookstore, drank hot cider by a fire pit, and sang along to songs from their youth. And one evening, while watching the sun dip behind a red-orange horizon, Helen whispered to herself, "I'm still here." That weekend didn't change her life in dramatic ways. She didn't meet someone new. She didn't make a bold declaration. But it stirred something in her, a sense of possibility. A reminder that she was allowed to say yes to adventure, even now, especially now, because life wasn't over, not even close. A new chapter had begun, and she was writing it, one gentle step at a time. What she's learned. When Helen returned home from Vermont, the house greeted her the same way it always had. Quiet, still, familiar. But something inside her had shifted. The silence no longer pressed against her in the same way. It had stopped feeling like an enemy. It had started to feel like space. Space to grow. Space to reflect. Space to simply be. She resumed her routines, but now with greater presence. Her morning coffee no longer tasted like a habit. It tasted like a moment. She noticed the way the steam curled upward in the morning light, the way her favorite mug warmed her hands. She started paying attention to the birds outside her kitchen window and kept a notepad nearby, just to jot down small joys. As the days turned into weeks, Helen found herself thinking more often about what it really meant to age alone, not in the tragic sense, but in the honest, human sense. It was something no one prepared you for. There were no classes, no handbooks. One day, you were surrounded by the rhythm of family, of partnership, of being needed. The next, you were navigating the stillness of your own time. But through that stillness, Helen had begun to uncover truths that had eluded her in earlier seasons of life. She had learned that solitude is not the same as loneliness, that being alone can offer clarity, healing, and even freedom, if you are willing to face yourself without judgment. She had learned that grief never fully leaves you. It changes shape. It softens over time, not because you stop missing someone, but because your heart grows wide enough to carry both memory and new meaning. Robert was no longer part of her daily life, but he remained a steady presence, woven into her thoughts, her habits, her way of seeing the world. Helen had also come to understand that friendship, especially in later years, is not just a gift, it is a necessity. June's companionship had been a lifeline, not because June had fixed anything, but because she had witnessed Helen's life. She had listened without needing to solve, laughed without reservation, and reminded Helen that she was still worthy of connection. And perhaps most importantly, Helen had learned that self-worth in older age must come from within. The roles she once held, wife, mother, caretaker, were meaningful, yes, but they did not define her completely. She was still herself, a woman with opinions, a woman with humor, a woman with stories worth telling. And finally, she was giving herself permission to be that woman out loud. Of course, there were still days that felt heavy, days when she missed her husband so much, it felt like a physical ache, days when she wished her sons lived closer or her joints didn't ache in the cold. But now, she had tools. She had her journal, her community, her garden. She had the courage to ask for help when she needed it, and the wisdom to rest when she didn't have all the answers. Helen had not rewritten her life, but she had reclaimed it. She had discovered that aging is not just about letting go. It is about making room. Room for new peace, new connections, new chapters that may be quieter than before, but no less meaningful. And perhaps that is the real lesson. That the beauty of this stage in life is not found in avoiding pain, or chasing happiness, or proving youth. It is found in standing still, looking around and realizing, I am still here. I am still becoming. And that is enough. The gift of presence. As the season shifted, Helen found herself moving through her days with more ease, more grace. Life was still quiet, but it no longer felt empty. Her days had rhythm again, not the rhythm of family chaos or constant caretaking, but one she composed for herself. One chilly afternoon, as she watered the last of her fall flowers, she noticed a moving truck parked 2 doors down. Boxes were being unloaded slowly, and a woman, about Helen's age, but visibly weighed down by exhaustion, stood in the driveway with her arms crossed tightly. Her name was Alice. Alice had just turned 70. She had recently lost her husband and moved across the country to be closer to her daughter. But her daughter was busy, her grandkids were teenagers, and Alice didn't know anyone in town. She looked like someone trying to hold herself together with threadbare hope. Helen watched her from a distance that first day. She remembered all too well what it felt like to stand in a new place, surrounded by unfamiliarity, carrying grief like a shadow. The kind of pain that makes even the smallest interactions feel like a mountain to climb. The next morning, Helen baked banana bread, not for any special reason, just because it felt like something warm to share. She wrapped it carefully, wrote a simple note that read, "Welcome to the neighborhood," and walked over. Alice opened the door slowly. Her eyes were red, her voice soft. Helen smiled gently and said, "You don't know me yet, but I've been where you are." That was all it took. Not a lecture, not advice, just presence. Over the next few weeks, the two women started seeing more of each other. A shared walk here, a cup of tea there. Slowly, the walls around Alice began to lower. She started talking about her husband's sudden illness, about leaving the home they'd built for 45 years, about how disoriented she felt, being in a new place that didn't yet feel like home. Helen didn't try to fix anything. She didn't offer platitudes like, "Everything happens for a reason." She simply listened. She nodded. She held space. And when the tears came, she let them come. At one point, Alice asked through tears, "Does it ever stop hurting?" Helen paused before answering. "No," she said quietly, "but it stops being the only thing you feel. And one day, without even realizing it, you'll laugh again. You'll find a tiny piece of beauty in the middle of an ordinary day, and it'll surprise you." That moment was not a breakthrough, but it was a beginning. Helen had come to understand that healing deepens when it's shared, that the wisdom we gather from pain becomes a gift, not just for ourselves, but for others who are quietly aching, unsure, or afraid. She had once believed her value was tied to what she did for others, to being a wife, a mother, a caretaker. But now she saw clearly. Her very presence was enough. Her ability to sit beside someone in their sorrow, without rushing them out of it, was a kind of medicine. She didn't need to change the world. She just needed to show up, with kindness, with honesty, with quiet strength. She had become, in her own gentle way, a keeper of comfort. And so, Helen began to live not just for herself, but as a presence in the lives of others. She made banana bread for neighbors. She brought a folding chair to the local park and invited people to sit with her. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they didn't. It didn't matter. What mattered was being there. In her garden, she placed a bench beneath the maple tree. A small sign above it read, "You're welcome to rest here." It wasn't fancy. It didn't need to be. It was her way of saying, "I see you. You're not alone." Helen no longer feared the quiet. She had become part of it. And within that quiet, she had discovered the most powerful truth of all. Sometimes, the greatest gift you can give is simply being present. In the stillness of early morning, Helen often found herself sitting by the kitchen window, the same place where she once poured cereal for 2 growing boys, where she used to chat with Robert over coffee while sunlight poured in across the table. Now, it was just her, and a quiet sense of peace she never expected to find at this age. The years had changed her. Life had changed her. But not in the way people fear. She had not become smaller, or lonelier, or forgotten. She had become softer, wiser, more awake to the beauty in small things. She had come to understand that growing older does not mean fading. It means unfolding. It means becoming more fully yourself, stripped of roles and expectations, no longer rushing, no longer performing. Just present. Just real. Helen had learned that the greatest transformations in life don't always come with fireworks or fanfare. Sometimes they arrive as quiet choices. The decision to go on a walk, to join a card game, to open the door to a stranger holding banana bread. They arrive when you choose connection over isolation, curiosity over comfort, courage over habit. And in those choices, life begins again. She often thought of the other women she had met since Robert passed. June with her quick wit and gentle strength, Alice with her trembling heart and slow healing. Each of them carrying loss, yes, but also carrying light. To Helen, they were proof that even when love is lost, life can still be meaningful. That even when the house is empty, your spirit doesn't have to be. That even when you are alone, you do not have to be lonely. In the garden behind her house, there was now a bench under the maple tree, a small gesture, an invitation to anyone who needed rest. Helen didn't always sit there. Sometimes she simply looked at it and and smiled. Because she knew that healing had a way of rippling outward. She had made it through the hardest part, not just the grief, but the fear that nothing good would follow. And in its place, she had found a different kind of joy. A quiet, grounded kind. The kind that lives in ordinary mornings and warm cups of tea. The kind that says, "This is enough." And now, if she could sit across from you, yes, you, the woman watching this video with a tender heart and tired soul, this is what she would say. You are not too late. You are not too old. You are not invisible. You are still here, which means your story is still unfolding, and you get to choose how it's told. Maybe you've lost someone. Maybe your days are quiet now. Maybe the mirror shows a version of yourself you don't always recognize. But if your heart is still beating, there is still purpose, still connection, still more to feel. More to give. More to receive. So say yes to a walk. Say yes to writing a memory down. Say yes to a second cup of coffee with a neighbor. Say yes to calling someone first. Say yes to resting. Say yes to forgiving yourself for not having it all figured out. Because aging is not about diminishing, it's about distilling. Distilling what matters. Distilling who you truly are. And learning to love that woman, fully, fiercely, and without apology. If Helen's story touched something in you, please don't keep it to yourself. Share it with a friend, a sister, a neighbor, maybe even a stranger. Someone else out there may need a reminder that they're not alone either. Thank you for being here. Thank you for choosing to keep going. And until next time, be well, be brave, be beautifully you.